Brozine was a form of currency for inmates. There have been different versions over the years, but this was pretty much the money of inmates. Each unit, and back then we're talking primarily Cummins and Tucker, had their own particular brozine. You didn't want inmates to have real money, because then if they escaped, they had cash on them, which could, obviously aid in their efforts to get away from prison. So they devised this system of coins that was called brozine. And there were different denominations, $1, 50 cents a quarter, and that's what inmates used to buy things out of the commissary. Snack cakes, back then, of course, cigarettes. The oldest kind has like wings on it, 4 wings. It looks like something out of a Star Wars movie, but it's a coin. And then there were round versions. Then at some point there was a silver version that wasn't real silver. I guess it was aluminum or something. Well, that was phased out, and we went to something called scrip, which was paper money. It came in a coupon booklet, and they ripped out different denominations whenever they bought something at the commissary. Now, of course, everything is computerized. But back then, that was it. That was money. Every once in a while around Pine Bluff, in some of the retail areas like restaurants, there'll still be a brozine coin that shows up. Well, inmates work, first and foremost. And they've always worked. Even in the early days, they worked. Well, as we have grown and progressed, the way inmates work has changed. But they still do a lot of the same things. They still farm. We still have an industry operation. But that said, they still have periods of free time in the evening. Sometimes it's occupied with programming. Sometimes it may be watching television. Sometimes it's whatever they can dream up. And inmates, usually left to their own devices, can be pretty creative. A lot of them are artistic. Some of them are just plain shifty. And they can come up with the most incredible things. They can literally make a weapon out of what seems like nothing. I have seen some of the most deadly looking weapons made out of nothing more than paper and water. They wet it, they let it dry, they shape it, then they use the cement floors to sharpen it. They can get anything that will hold a liquid that's large enough and get a little yeast and a little sugar. They're going to make hooch out of it. And so that's how come we have to constantly watch all the yeast and the sugar. I think it's important to put it in perspective. Arkansas had a very raucous prison system. It was honestly one of the worst in the country. And that's what happens when, to save money, to avoid spending money, you use inmates to supervise other inmates, and you give them weapons. There were so many inmates supervising other inmates in the efforts of cost consciousness that it became awful. It reached a point where it was at first partly unconstitutional, then completely unconstitutional. And Arkansas at that point found itself at a crossroads. We can continue as we are and be unconstitutional, or we can change. And Arkansas said, we think we'll change. By 1983, we had reached a point where we were constitutional again. By 1996, Arkansas became fully accredited by the American Correctional Association. Now, everything we have is accredited. So Arkansas has had this unique odyssey. We have gone from one of the absolute rock bottom worst to one of the penthouse best. For people who haven't seen the artifacts, it's really worth the trip, because it is a huge slice of what makes Arkansas, Arkansas. Because I think beyond the fact that you've got electric chairs and death mask and all those weird things, you overall get a sense of Arkansas's resilience.
We want to thank you so much for joining us for this podcast. And we want to really thank Dina Tyler for coming and giving us this really great interview. She was wonderful. We really appreciate her doing that.
And you can see these items on exhibit right now at the Old State House Museum in Little Rock. The exhibit name is Badges, Bandits, and Bars, and it will be on exhibit for roughly one more year until March of 2011.
Thank you so much for joining us.
And we hope that you'll join us on our future podcast. Thanks. The Old State House Museum is a museum of the Department of Arkansas Heritage, and this project has been funded in part by the Natural and Cultural Resources Council and from private donations.